All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight. We are starting on our second in the series of Crown Percussion off-season clinic videos. We're going to be continuing our goal of fostering a larger percussion community by sharing some of the methods behind our approach to teaching the percussion section at Carolina Crown. So my name is Dean Johnson. I'm our front ensemble coordinator, and I'm here with my friend Sean tonight. Sean, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Sean McElroy. I'm the ensemble coordinator at Carolina Crown. While I work with the full corps a lot of times, I'm also pretty involved with the drum line, and definitely really excited to be here. It's great to see such a good turnout for us. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, tonight we are doing a clinic called The Four Pillars of Practicing. We thought it was a pretty universal kind of concept to talk through. Practicing is something that we cannot avoid in our goal of just being better percussionists and better people, hopefully. And I think there's a lot of questions about how to do it properly, and there's a lot of misconceptions on the right and wrong ways of doing it. A lot of what we're going to be talking through tonight is just kind of our philosophies that we like to adopt as a staff. And we want to share those with you guys just to kind of have like a basic understanding of how we approach practicing and what we want to get out of that. So we found it's pretty common, especially for the beginner percussionist, to see students practicing music in a way that's naturally leading them to replicate inefficient motion or bad timing, maybe bad technique habits, which gives them a more fractured and kind of incomplete understanding of the music overall. This often takes the form of a student kind of just mindlessly and endlessly repping through their music. I'm sure you've been there, I've been there before, where you'll play something and you'll make a mistake and you'll stop, and then you'll start again and you'll make the same mistake and you'll stop and you'll do it over and over and over ad nauseum. And there's not a lot of growth that comes out of that type of approach to practicing music. What we're going to talk through tonight is something that's a little bit more intentional. Obviously there are the four pillars. We're going to move through each of those in sequence, so that we can kind of talk about how to develop better musical habits, how to get more out of your practice session, and how to just see growth overall from the beginning of your practicing endeavors to hopefully, that first big long-term goal milestone. So when we talk to our students about developing these better practice habits, we tend to guide the conversation with four main areas of focus. Those are our pillars of practicing. So those are going to include setting your goals for your practice session. That's your first pillar. Your environment that you're practicing in, which is more than just the space that you're in. We'll get into that. The methods that you employ when you're practicing, and how you eventually review your progress and review your practice session overall. So those are the four basic pillars, and when each is properly employed, we find that students tend to achieve their goals a little bit faster and a little more intuitively. It's not as much of a struggle to learn and to implement these, better practicing habits. So we posit that these four specific areas of focus will help instill a better and more efficient learning process and help you to start making your practice sessions much more effective and hopefully much more fun as well. So let's go ahead and get started by talking through the first pillar. Sean, you want to go ahead and take it?
Yeah. So, first pillar, goals. It's probably the one thing we all have in common. We all have a specific goal. It was the first step in our journey down this road of musicianship and trying to develop our skills. And we initially saw something that motivated us. We wanted to duplicate what we saw, or something got us excited, and we innately created a goal for ourselves. A lot of our goals can be similar, different, whatever, but we're all at least united by that fact that we share these goals. You'll find, for me, it's easy to recognize that these goals, they really kind of dictate what your behavior is going to be. A good, strong understanding of your goal can motivate your practice sessions. It can motivate kind of the lifestyle that you have to live to support those practice sessions. And keeping your eye on that goal will really start to influence a new lifestyle that will really be beneficial to other areas more than just your percussive abilities. I think it's real important to get specific with your goals. I think a lot of us, we all want to be good. that's a broad goal that we all definitely share. We want to be the best we possibly can be at drumming, playing the marimba, timpani, whatever our skill set might be. And I think it helps to narrow in that goal and kind of create a little bit of a finish line for yourself. Kind of a designated, specific spot that you're trying to achieve. You'll notice that as you achieve one goal, you automatically have your eyes on the next goal. Or sometimes, your goals you'll have many short-term and long-term goals that you're looking at. But regardless, this will be our driving force, and it'll really help us focus our behaviors that eventually result in us achieving our goals. Some examples of some goals that we might all share, like maybe we have a goal of being able to play a specific exercise that we've never been able to play before. We went to an audition, we got an exercise from that group, and it was just way above us, and we saw people playing it at a way faster speed than we could, or something you found online, or maybe there's music that you've received that is way above you, or is just something new for you that you really have to do a lot of dissection to fully digest. Maybe there's a rudiment you want to play. Like I've never played book reports before, and I have this goal of learning to play book reports. Certain permutations, certain tempos with those rudiments, ensembles you want to be in. That's a big one for us. We all usually want to bring our skill set into a larger format and participate with others, and hopefully eventually create and experience performance opportunities with these skill sets. So all of those things you can kind of draw from to create specific goals for yourself, and write those goals out. Just like, even right here, the PDF that we sent you guys, the what we're covering tonight definitely, it's more of like the philosophical side of what we do a little bit, and it helps to get a little bit, to write some things down. Keep a journal, have some type of logbook to track your progress. Eventually, when you write those goals down, you might take the next step of developing a strategy, developing a roadmap that includes those short-term and long-term goals, and eventually that will turn into getting really specific for what you're doing in your practice sessions. And the other thing is, write down your goals. When you achieve them, that's a good feeling. That's a successful feeling that you'll want to replicate again, and that'll go back to the motivation side. That thing that will actively influence that positive behavior, which is great practice. Get those goals, make a schedule. I think this is so important. You'll find your goals to be very broad. You'll have multiple goals, small and big. You've got to get specific with a schedule that allows you to kind of chip away at the block in a routine fashion. It's really important that, we talk about this in the packet, where, you don't want to just, sometimes it feels good to like practice for 4 hours a day, rest 2 or 3 days, and then practice again for 4 hours a day. I highly recommend avoiding that type of routine. To me, I approach this in a very like athletic sense. I think percussion is kind of an athletic musical instrument if you think about it. And if I want to be the best, I'm going to train like a pro. And the pros, they exercise every day, and we need to get behind our equipment. We need to get the sticks, the weights in our hands, and we need to train ourselves every day and create a routine that allows us, to develop over the long term. Muscle memory is a huge part of percussion, and you want to make sure you're getting daily doses of positive muscle memory, and that's what's going to develop great habits, which will eventually lead to you being able to explore skill sets that are surprising and fun. And I promise you this: the better you get at your skill, the more fun you will have. I promise that 100%. And some of the practicing, some of the training we have to do, just like for athletes, it's not always fun. Sometimes you're you're sitting there sweating through some part, or, you know, you just can't, your mind isn't telling your hands what you're trying to tell your hands what to do, but they're just not doing it, you know, and that's not fun. But, you know, go back to those goals. Remember why you're doing this, persevere, you know, and you'll find yourself when you, those obstacles make the, you know, make the achievement of the goals so much more satisfying, and so much, and that satisfaction, that'll be addictive. You'll want to do it again. You'll find yourself, you know, being able to practice harder and smarter, and you know, you'll develop really quickly. Last thing I want to say about goals: make sure you rest. You know, if you're practicing 3+ hours a day, your body, your mind needs to rest. You need time to absorb what happened. You need time to step away from what you're doing. That's a really important part of the development, and you know, figuring out what type of rest you need versus how much you can push yourself. You know, that's a balance that we individually have to explore. You know, in terms of getting the maximum potential from our practice time. That's the first pillar, goals. You know, I'll probably mention it a few times, but definitely go back. You know, we this document that we posted right before this clinic that accompanies this video and this session. There's a lot of great information in there that I'm not going to go through maybe word for word all the time. Sometimes I will, but I want to maybe have a more personal explanation of what you see in the document. But you know, there's a lot of good material in here. There's also some good sources, you know, and reference resources and outside reference material to, you know, further, you know, further learning opportunities and you know, things like goals, motivation, and whatnot. Next pillar though, pillar 2, environment. Okay, and luckily we're this one's easy for me to explain because I've got a lot of different, you know, visual elements here. Your practice environment, it's everything in my opinion. I think there's it's a space you want to be comfortable in. It's a space, you know, you don't want to have distractions in. For me, where I'm at right now, I'm actually in my office. I don't know if you can see my desk back here. I don't know if you can see my whiteboard of things to do. It's very blank right now because of everything that's going on. Luckily, got plenty of time to practice. But yeah, this is my environment. You know, this is a room where I'm productive in. You know, it's not my bedroom. This is an area where when I step into my office, I'm either, you know, doing something. I'm a drill writer. I'll be writing drill. I'll be, you know, planning for upcoming seasons. I'll be practicing right here, you know, behind my pad. A few things in terms of environment, equipment. Right, this is really important. I don't know if you can see. This is actually a drum right here. I've got 2 pads stacked up. You know, and I did this just to get the maximum viewing of what we're going to be doing today. But I've got a drum underneath this. Very important to use the equipment. You know, I think this deserves. Bear with me, because I think this deserves a really important conversation. A lot of us started by, you know, drumming on a drum pad, or you know that I remember that old Remo white dot pad that most kids started out in elementary school. You know, and I think, you know, as we start to get better as percussionists, you'll notice that you've got to get on an instrument, and you've got to put yourself in a practice environment that's authentic to that's as authentic to a performance situation as possible. For me, what I do is I make sure, you know, I've got a drum stand. I'm practicing good posture. I'm in a position where, like, I even simulate, like, how far would the drum be from my chest when I had a carrier on if I'm wearing the drum. You know, I practice with my eyes forward. You know, that's key in there. You know, if I'm a marimba player, you know, there's some parts that demand a 5-octave range. You know, and you've got to. You know, it might be hard in this current situation, you know, but we got to get creative, and we got to do everything we can to play on our instruments as much as possible. And it's, again, sometimes I mention that because I know that takes extra effort sometimes, and I want to reiterate that it's worth that extra effort, big time. Okay, because when you get to your performance situations, or rehearsals and performance situations, you'll find yourself in a state of comfort, rather than a state of change from, sitting down in your chair, leaning with your, head tilted towards your left hand, playing like that. I can't tell you how many times I've seen, people sitting on the floor playing like that. And we got to do that sometimes. I've had great practice sessions, working some 4 mallets on the floor with some students, and, some great things like that. But search out your instrument is an authentic instrument as best you can. And it could be a very, very wise investment based on your long-term goals. Some other equipment related things, the metronome. This is my metronome that I'm going to use the iPad app for the metronome because it's louder, but I've got a DB60 made by Boss. It's a great metronome. It's got lots of subdivisions. This thing is absolutely essential. We'll go into a lot of how to use the metronome, what that involves later. Right, you can't see it, but right here, there's a mirror. All right, and normally I would be faced this way, and I'd be drumming in front of the mirror, eyes up, practicing good posture, immediately analyzing my sticks, and getting that instantaneous feedback and discipline and accountability that really maximizes my practice time. A water bottle. Okay, actually, I'm going to take a sip real quick here because I need it. Stay hydrated. It's key to everything. A fan, a towel. I've got a ceiling fan in here. That way when I'm, sweating the flam drags, turn on the ceiling fan, cool off a little bit, grab a drink of the water. Again, this is all these small details, they add up, that creates a space in this atmosphere that's just inviting the progress, and that's key. A video camera, I use my iPad to video record myself sometimes, because in the review process, you'll find that a video recording is a little bit different, and it's a little bit more unbiased of an opinion of yourself than the mirror when you're actually putting in the effort to play what you're playing. So definitely something we'll come back to later. A music stand, I got mine right here. I don't know if you can see it in the vid. A speaker to amplify music or the metronome. I use a Bluetooth speaker here. I'll connect it to, I'll sometimes like play with a song instead of the metronome, play with music that I like, just sit here and, work my hands out to music. Again, all just creates an enjoyable environment. Also, believe it or not, I've got like different pads in here. I've got like this really old Cymox. This thing is crazy. It's a really old Cymox quad pad. It's like the first one they ever made back in like 1997. I'm not kidding about that. It's like missing pads and stuff, and it's super small. But I'll throw that on top of here and try to learn some patterns that I might have to be teaching later on. I've got this this is gonna last, a bucket of sticks, no joke. All right, all these I try to play with different sticks. I think it's really important to maintain good sticks, to maintain like I don't perform with these, or I never play like where I'm playing a lot of rim shots, and I like these are my like really good sticks that all feel really good. Some of them, are like memorable sticks to me, and I'll play with weird sticks sometimes. Like these are the Zildjian Super 7A maple dips. Oh yeah, they're super thin, but they make me play. They make me play so much different when I do it, and it makes my hands feel different. And I don't know, that variety makes my hands feel stronger. That variety and ability and the variety and touch that these will play with. And then I've got the Tom Hanna Beast. These heavy sticks for a good chop out. These are my go-to sticks. I'll probably play with these more later. I've got books. We'll talk about this later more as well, but I got a bunch of books that I read. Some George Lawrence Stone. Shout out to this guy. He's awesome. Great book. But just a lot, like seriously, all of this was already here before I made this vid. I just kind of brought it in closer so I could demonstrate to you guys what I have here. But this just all contributes to like my favorite room in the house, where I'm able to practice, zone out, avoid distractions, and just really feel comfortable and making my progress and focusing on my craft. Um, uh, Other things. So again, we're still on pillar 2 here, the environment. Okay, community is a part environment community is a part of environment. The people I surround myself with. Sometimes that's friends, sometimes that's teachers. I think it's imperative that you find people that are supportive of your progress, right? I think it's also imperative that you find people that are better than you to surround yourself with. And some of my most valuable learning experiences are when I'm like in a room full of people and they can all play better than me. And I'm just watching them play, and I'm learning because I'm seeing it firsthand. And it's just it's almost like chops by osmosis. I'm close to them, and things, I don't know, I just start, the more I hang out with them, the more I start to become what they're doing as well. So finding that supportive atmosphere of people is crucial. And I think that includes having a good teacher and a reliable teacher and a source of information that you trust. Something that you can really appreciate, be thankful for. A good teacher and a good source of reliable information, that's invaluable. So make sure you have that. I'd also say mindset would be a part of probably maybe the last element of the second pillar here. To me, when I'm practicing, it's all about setting the ego aside. Even in this video, even when we're practicing later on, I'm gonna be playing, and I'm not gonna be afraid to make mistakes. I'm gonna be, this is gonna be about me, almost being excited to examine those mistakes, because the more I'm aware of those mistakes, the more I'm going to attack them and try to make, to try to resolve them and develop those inaccuracies into better skill sets. I set my ego at the side when I come in this room. I also set my phone to silence sometimes, and which is difficult. Like, even, if I'm using my iPad for the metronome, airplane mode, with all the technology that we sometimes have to use to practice today, all this really helpful, insightful, useful technology, sometimes those can also incite and invite other distraction, which you don't want. So, be cognizant of that. All of those things really affect your environment. So that's pillar 1. Pillar 1 is goals. Pillar 2, environment. That brings us to pillar 3. I'm going to talk through pillar 3 a little bit, and then we'll hand it back over to Dean here. I know this video is definitely going to be a little bit more lecture based, like we talked in the beginning. So bear with us here. Pay attention to the details. We'll get into some drumming stuff soon, I promise. But the method about which you drum, this is probably one of the more in-depth areas, and even if you look at our document, this is the more in-depth area of the document. When I think the main thing I could say about method in terms of how it applies to your practice routine is make sure you are practicing with a method. All right, we're going to study a method in here tonight called the macro, micro, macro method. I wish that I could abbreviate that shorter, but I want to be clear. There's many methods to explore when you're trying to develop your technique and your skills. And a method could be described as an organized way at which you approach, your development. It's so easy, like we were talking about at the beginning, it's so easy to just rep things mindlessly and stop on mistakes and start over, stop on mistakes, start over. I mean, you'd be surprised about how consistent bad practice habits are from person to person, I think having the method will really kind of, let you cut through that and really hone in your practice and get specific, into the nitty gritty of what you're really doing. I think obviously pillar 3's the really time consuming pillar of practice methods here. So we'll definitely be going deep into this one. I'm not going to read off every word from our list of the document. I'm going to take us through this rather quickly. But again, I'll ask you to reference this later on. And even after this video, go back through the document. And I guarantee you, after hearing me explain it and then reading through, you'll have a deeper understanding than you had before. So, the macro, micro, macro method. Okay, it's 3 steps. This method, it's one of the most common used. I see it used in rehearsals a lot. I've brought it into my own practice routines. It's not anything too sophisticated or like highbrow. It's something kind of easy to identify and present for our clinic tonight. But a lot of times in rehearsal, the best way I could describe macro, micro, macro is like if you're in rehearsal, imagine, you're about to work letter A to letter C. The instructor will have you play it a few times, and then he'll say, whoa, we got problems on bar 2, and then we got problems on bar 7 and 8. Okay, let's play the problems on bar 2. Okay, those are better. Let's play the problems on bar, let's examine the issues in bar 7 and 8. Let's make an exercise for them, get better at them. Okay, now let's go back to putting those in the macro context. So you start with a longer phrase, identify the issues, go back and segment those identified issues, and then put them back into the overall context of things. It's a very common way of doing things. Like I said, a lot of people do it during rehearsal. I highly recommend doing a lot of that in your practice sessions. If you've got a piece of material, practice material based off of what your goals are, play through the material. Play a larger chunk. That's really key in the first step, in the macro step. Play a larger chunk of it to really examine where your issues are. If you play a small chunk, you might only discover 1 or 2 small issues. But if you play a larger chunk of what you're trying to work on, you might discover some big issues and transitions, or you might discover issues that are more urgent priority than some of the small issues in there. So definitely in that macro, that first step, play through it. Get your muscles warm to whatever you're playing. Get it in your blood a little bit. Play that bigger phrase in there. After that, identify your smaller segments. Take those small segments and rep them, examine them, slow them down, strive for perfection. Okay, when you're doing the first step, the macro step, sometimes you should always be striving for perfection, but in that step, you're going to find yourself more in the examination of, you're striving for perfection, but you're looking for those inaccuracies to use in the next step. And step 2, though, it's all about perfection. Slow the tempo way down. Take it 1 beat at a time. Use some of the practice hacks that we'll be covering here in a second to really, dissect and examine, what you're looking at. The goal is that you basically want to relearn what you're practicing, and have a way deeper understanding of the checkpoints, of the definitions, and I find, a little pro tip, I find when I have a really good session with the macro, micro, macro method, that the part feels slower to me. Like that fast triplet roll at 192, with all the flam rudiments in between this, that once I dissect it, go down tempo, really try to perfect it, or if the tempo back up, I'll notice that, I don't know, I have, my brain is wrapped around each partial a little bit more in a way where it feels a little slower to me, and it's a little bit more on my muscles. And it's such a good feeling to have when that happens. So, something to look for out there, and that happens over time, but you'll also notice that in short-term success too. The micro section, that's where most of your practice time occurs. Okay, that's where 90% of the time you devote to practice should be in the micro stage of things, breaking things down. And that can change, like leading up to a performance. You might want to start going back into the macro chunk of things and preparing yourself for those bigger performance opportunities. But hopefully, I'm always a big believer that good practicing leads to good rehearsing. Good rehearsing leads to great performances. And then, for me, that eventually led to better education opportunities, better teaching, And, you know, so even for me, it all comes back down to practice. You know, that'll really set up all the stages of your ability as a musician in the lifespan of musicianship. I think, you know, also you know, we went through the macro, the first step, macro, the second step, micro. The third step is another macro, because after you go through the micro process, you want to put things back together, like we said, see how they feel. And that's also another opportunity to examine.
Why do we have somebody playing a snare right now?
How did we?
Hey Sean, you're muted.
Really?
So yeah, you're unmuted.
Yeah,
now.
you were just muted.
How did that happen?
Someone talked and for some reason that muted you.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Sorry about
Thanks.
that, I guess. Keep those microphones muted. All good here. I'm about to hand it back to Dean anyways. Probably a good stopping point. I was just saying the macro part of the process, it's a review. It's a good review stage as well. Not just, you know, or examination stage where you get to analyze, you know, the work you just did. So macro, micro, macro. The middle one of those, the micro, that's the bulk part of what you're going to be doing. So that covers most of the talking of Pillar 3. If you notice in the document, there's a lot of little hacks we have listed out for Pillar 3. I'm going to hand it back over to Dean, and we're actually going to spend a little bit of time examining these little hacks and putting them into play. Dean will run through some stuff with the pit. I'll run through some stuff with the battery. I encourage everybody, whether you're more, you know, front ensemble or battery focused, to play along with these things, do the best you can, even if it's a little different for you, and get the most out of it. So, Dean, unless there's anything else you want to add about what I just covered, I'll hand it back to you here.
No, I think that was pretty good, man. We're going to just kind of talk through a couple of examples now. So we're going to go from macro to micro to macro. I thought we could do something that's pretty universally learned by a lot of front ensemble folks out there. It's also in our packet. If you have our packet, it's called broccoli. It's one of my favorite permutation exercises. One of the more common exercises that's being taught and learned nowadays. One of my favorite things to do is to take different breakdowns and apply them to broccoli. It's a pretty simple exercise overall, but when you break it down, you actually get a little bit of a better understanding of the mechanics that go into it, especially the double lateral motions and how you return back to your plane and what your technique is doing and how that affects your sound ultimately. So there's lots of little nerdy things I like to get into when we start talking about broccoli, but let's start with the macro. Let's start with just playing the ascending 4s and 2s. We're going to focus on that section of broccoli. Really, you can kind of start with any specific big focus. You know, if I wanted to start with, you know, broccoli overall, let's play all of broccoli and then get a little more micro after that. And maybe even get a little more micro after that, I can. But we're just going to start with the ascending 4s and 2s currently. Cool? So I'm going to put the metronome on, and we're going to play the ascending 4s and 2s. I'll count you off. 1, 2, here we go. Two, we'll do it again. Okay, so let's say you've played through your big chunk focus, your macro focus, let's say 3, 4, 5 times, enough times to where you can actually identify what you'd like to practice and what you'd like to fix for that day. For me, my left hand typically does not respond in a similar fashion to my right hand as far as technique is concerned. Specifically, the 2 mallet doesn't always like to return up to the top. So something that I could do is let's break down just one hand at a time. Let's play just the left hand. So a lot of times when you're learning broccoli, you learn the full permutation, and that takes a lot of mental bandwidth in and of itself. It takes a long time to get that down and feel comfortable. You eventually start feeling the groove that this permutation creates on the A minor seventh chord. However, after you've got that groove, you probably stopped thinking about, how you could improve it. You're like, okay, I understand the concept, I get it, I know what I'm doing. But there's always ways that we can perfect and enhance our knowledge of something that's super familiar to us at this point. So what I'd like to do is play the ascending fours only, but I want to play the 1 and 2 mallet by themselves. So it's going to be a little bit different. Think about it for a second. The right hand I'm going to use as a plane reference. So I'll have it just at the top, and I'm going to use that while I reference the 1 and 2 mallet. Now, I've got my video camera set up on Zoom, so I get to see myself talking and my feedback of, my visual feedback, basically. But if I didn't have that, I would want to have a mirror in front of me so I could start kind of getting a better idea of instant feedback. Okay, my 2 mallet's still not meeting the same plane as the 3 mallet, so I know that in theory I'm not returning back to the same height. I'm not going to get the same velocity, which height is a factor of, that follows into those following strokes because of that. So I am mainly just focusing on how I'm returning back to the plane in the left hand. Cool? Go ahead and play along with me if you want. This is the ascending fours, but just the left hand. 1, 2, here we go. Cool, we'll do that again. And 1, 2, here we go. Cool. So I took that left hand. I identified a couple of issues even when I was doing that micro focus chunk. So that 2 mallet that I mentioned does not like to always return back to the top following the 1 mallet. Each time that we play the 2 mallet, it's going to be coming out of an out to in lateral. So I can start thinking about, okay, what can I do to apply a change to my technique? What can I do to actually make this better? If I know that that 2 mallet is not going to always return back up to the top of the plane, maybe I don't think about over rotating the 1 mallet. Maybe I don't need to give it as much energy since it naturally wants to produce more energy and more motion. Maybe I restrict that a little bit and I focus a little more on the 2 mallet. So let's do the same thing. This is the ascending fours of broccoli, just playing the 1 and 2 mallet. And for me, in my micro focus, I'm going to specifically focus on that 2 mallet being a little bit more of the pivot point of these double laterals, if you will. Cool. So ascending fours, just the left hand. And 1, 2, here we go. Let's try that again. And 1, 2, here we go. Cool. So I'm feeling a little bit better about that. I have a better understanding of how the left hand fits into the full picture of 1, 2, 3, 4 permutation that's being gridded across the starting point. Cool. So what I can then do is either shift my focus. I could try to understand the right hand by itself better, or I could apply it now to the 2s and do the same thing. It kind of depends on how your practicing is going. So this is why it's really important for you to stay in tune with yourself and aware of what your tendencies are and to react to those. It also helps to have your notebook. I think Sean mentioned having a notebook earlier. I think that's super helpful. I like to write notes to myself. Okay, I worked on this specific breakdown. I took broccoli by itself at 80 beats per minute. I then played just the left hand by itself. I isolated the 4s ascending, then I isolated the 2s ascending, then I switched over to the right hand. Like writing myself a little note, and maybe this is just how my brain works, it just helps me better internalize the work that I did and why I did it. Let's try a different example. Let's say, for instance, that 2 mallet that I was mentioning is pesky, and so really I want to focus on it and how it reacts to the 3 mallet, which is another inside mallet, and they're right beside each other. They're the closest mallets that we've got. So as far as a reference to playing, sometimes they're the most easy to see. So if I wanted to break this down and just focus on that 2 mallet, something I could do was remove the 1 mallet. Let's say I just take the 1 mallet out of that. I'll let that be my playing reference. You know, in the last example, I had the right hand as a playing reference. Now I'm going to make my 1 mallet the playing reference. So I'll play 2, 3, and 4 throughout, and I'll leave out that 1 mallet. Let's try just the 4s on that and see how we do with it, okay? All right, and 1, 2, here we go. Let's try that one more time. 1, 2, here we go. Cool. So once I'm starting to get a little bit more comfortable with that, then I could either apply it to the 2s. Let's try that. And 1, 2, here we go. And 1, 2, here we go. Cool. So now that I feel like I can get through the 4s and the 2s separately, let's put them together. This is the ascending 4s and 2s, removing the 1 mallet. And 1, 2, here we go. Okay, nice, cool. So basically what I've done is I've isolated that 2 mallet by actually removing a different mallet. Because all of those motions that I'm playing with the 2 mallet are the secondary motion of a double lateral, and out to in double lateral specifically, I was able to more focus on my rebound of the 2 mallet, which was my issue to start with. So when I focused on that and really tried to lock it in as far as its velocity of upstroke back to the top, matching the 3, I'm feeling like I'm starting to make a little bit more progress, okay? So I've gone through a couple different micro-focused, detail-oriented breakdowns. Let's put it back into the original. This is going into the 3rd step of the 3rd pillar, which is our macro focus. So now that I've isolated that rebound of the 2 mallet, now that I feel really good about how I can better focus on that, let's see if I can do the same thing while putting it into the full context. Cool? So we're playing the ascending 4s and 2s of Broccoli's if you want to play along. And 1, 2, here we go. Let's try it again. And 1, 2, here we go. Cool. So I've gone from macro, starting with just the 4s and 2s of the ascending motion in Broccoli. Then I went into micro. I took just the left hand. I removed the right hand, focused on the double lateral motion in the left hand. Through that, I figured out, okay, the 2 mallets rebound is not exactly what I would like that to be. So then I went into another different micro-focused breakdown, which is removing the 1 mallet so that I could better isolate the 2 mallets rebound. Once I felt better about that, something I could have done to kind of make it a little bit more cohesive is maybe put that back into the original breakdown, which was just the left hand, focusing on those double laterals. Instead, what I did is I went ahead and put it back into the ascending 4s and 2s, the full macro focus. And I felt good about that.
Ah, porque le
Now,
di
the thing
la
that I
computadora.
isolated and figured out through that was that I tend to rush just a tiny bit. When I'm going from the 4 starting point back to the 1 starting point, I tend to rush. So at this point, it's a good thing for me to kind of take note of that. And the next time that I break down broccoli, that's something that I'm going to have in my notebook that I'm ready to knock out and ready to really focus on. Let's go ahead and hop over to Sean. Sean's going to make this make a little more sense for our battery friends.
¿Qué hice?
Again, if you are jumping on the call right now, if you could mute your mic, that would be super helpful just to,
No, es para...
the confusion.
Ah, usted está hablando. Nos están escuchando.
Thank you very much. All right, Sean, go for it.
Yeah, excellent. Nice job, Dean.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for the front ensemble peeps, some of this stuff you might be able to play along to. I'm going to keep it pretty simple. While Dean was able to demonstrate the macro version really well with broccoli, for the battery, for those of you that have the access to the crown packet right now, we've got these exercises in the primers that pretty much a lot of those, you'll find a lot of those exercises are a little bit of like the breakdowns for the micro sections. So everything we do here might not include the 3-step process, because I want to show you a few tricks. If you guys could reference the 3rd pillar in the document, we've got a list of a few hacks. I'm going to go through some stuff on this list that incorporates some of these hacks. I'm also going to talk about the metronome a little bit. So let's get started. First of all, I'm glad Dean said this earlier. He was talking about left hand having a weakness. I think for every percussionist, your left hand is the weak link. Even people that are left-handed naturally, we play so many things off the right hand that the left hand always kind of lacks in needed dominance. So one thing I like to do in my practice sessions, play almost everything off the left. We're not going to do that here together, but we're at least going to start by playing some stuff off the left. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to play some 8th notes. We're going to play this with the metronome. I'll kind of be talking us through what's happening. And I want you to play with your left hand, and I want you to play nonstop. Okay, this is kind of I call this kind of aerobics, and we're gonna be listening to the Met. We're gonna be really we're gonna get some good ear training by listening to the Met, and we'll go through a couple different variations here. All right. So let's start by just playing some mezzo piano 8th notes. You can put your right hand down to the side. You just need your left hand out. We're gonna play some mezzo piano 8th notes, continuous, nonstop. We'll think about it kind of in 4/4 though, okay? 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right? And then what we're gonna do here is we're gonna add an accent on beat 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're just playing nonstop. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll try not to get off if I'm talking. And what I'm doing right now is I'm listening to the Met. I'm trying to make sure I don't get off of it at all. See, I had to stop because I started talking there. But I'm playing nonstop, I'm listening to the Met, and what I'm doing is I'm trying to bury the Met. I'm trying to create a homogeneous sound between my playing and the metronome. I'm listening to that Met hard, I'm burying it. And then I'll throw in another accent on count 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And let's stop right here. Stop. Okay, so we're going to pick that up here in a second. Couple other things I want to explain. When I'm doing that, what I mean by burying the Met is that I'll find that there's a time when I'm playing where my sound is so blended with the Met that they kind of become one unified sound. And in certain volumes, I can't hear the metronome at all. I've completely buried it with the sound that I'm making from my instrument or my practice surface, whatever that might be. And when I play for a long time, I'll start to notice that I'll lose that blend. And my goal when I'm playing for this long is not just to work endurance and that nonstop action, but it's also to get that ear training and that concentration training where I'm focusing in on that one sound, trying to bury it, trying to keep my muscles constant. You know, I'm thinking no tension. I'm thinking stay relaxed. I'm trying to check my posture and all that, okay? Let's do it a few more times here. Let's come in with just left hand, no accents, just left hand 8 notes here. 1, 2, ready, go. And I'm listening to the Met, blend it. Nice and steady. Add an accent, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just add that accent whenever. 4, 1, 2. Add an accent on 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Add an accent on 1. 1, 3, 4. 1, 3, 4. 1, 3, 4. 1, 3, 4. And as you're at home, try to bury your sound with me. The sound coming out of the computer. When I don't mess up as I'm talking. I'm going for the perfect blend. One more time and stop here now. Okay. So let's. So again, that's just some aerobics. That's just one way I practice, where I will play literally nonstop, easy patterns. That's kind of how I start my practicing to train myself to play with the metronome. It's not a given. Just by turning on the Met, that's not a given that I'm going to fix everything. I've got to really listen to what it sounds like to perfectly blend with the metronome. Okay, I'm going to move on to a couple different patterns here. Normally I would do that off my left. I do that off my right. You know, I get my hands nice and warm. I get my ears warmed up with that ear training, and then I really start dissecting some patterns. Today, the pattern we're going to dissect is a paradiddle, right? And one of the methods that I'm going to use on this is the method of, it's mentioned in our list, the method of playing just one hand at a time. Not playing with both hands, but examining just one hand. That's what we just did with the aerobics. But now I'm going to take a two-handed pattern, the paradiddle, and break it down just one-handed. And I'll give you kind of an example of, you know, how you might break down a pattern like a paradiddle, right? Let's do this. Let's start out by playing 8 paradiddles in a row. I'm going to accent each downbeat at a good forte. Keep the inner beats down at piano. Okay, 8 paradiddles. 1, 2, ready, go. 2, ready, go. 2, ready, go. Yeah, see, and each time I played those, I thought I got a little bit better. So that's kind of the macro section, what I just did. I just played a few paradiddles in a row just to get them in my blood. Now I'm going to break them down a little bit here. I'm going to go down tempo just a little bit. And how we're going to break this down is literally one beat at a time, okay? One paradiddle at a time. We're starting with the right hand. Let's play this rhythm here. And 1 and a 2. Just hop in whenever you can. 1 and a 2, 3, 4. 1 and a 2, 3, 4. 3, 4. 1 and a 2, 3, 4. 1 and a 2, 3, 4. And you'll notice, I'll stop for a second. You'll notice it's just this rhythm. That rhythm, 1 and a 2, but it doesn't have the release. 1 and a 2. 2 is empty. All right, and I'm hoping you can hear the metronome pretty well in my room. It might be hard through this Zoom recording. All right. Another thing I'll do sometimes is I'll play. I've actually got a kick drum right here. I don't know if you can hear that, but it makes a sound where my foot is, and I'll put my foot on the downbeat. So I'm using my feet. I think that's one thing that deserves its own mention real quick. Practice with your feet, especially as a battery musician. Always keep your feet involved in what you're doing. That's why I stand up, so I can mark time, so I can tap my foot. You know, it's a huge part of what we're doing, okay? Back to the paradiddle here. All right, we're taking just one hand of a paradiddle here. We're at 1 and a 2. hop back in here. We're gonna keep going in a second. Now we're gonna add a stroke. That's 2 strokes actually. 1 and a 2 E, 3. 1 and a 2 E, 3. Okay, so now what I've done is I've essentially taken 2 paradiddles and I've taken one hand away. And now I'm not even playing with the left hand to do this. I'm just examining what the right hand is doing. All right, and the rhythm you get is 1 and a 2 E, 3. 1 and a 2 E, 3. That's a pattern, right? So let's play just the right hand a few more times. 1, 2, ready, go. 1 and a 2 E, 3. 1 and a 2 E, 3. All right, and in this one, you'll notice that I'm actually not burying the met on beat 2. I'm actually letting the met speak itself. So again, I'm using the met to calibrate my hand in that. Okay, so I've broken down that, and then I'm going to start adding in one stroke at a time. One left hand at a time. Add in with me. Oops. Add another stroke. And let's accent this stroke like it is in the paradiddle. So again, what I've done here is I started with just my right hand, and I keep adding a hand until I'm going to eventually build back up to my macro, which is multiple paradiddles in a row. So let's do 2 paradiddles. It'll be paradiddle, paradiddle, stop. All right, here we go. 1, 2, ready, go. Again. Just hop in. All right, and again, each time I'm doing that, I'm really listening to the consistency of what I'm doing. I'm trying to feel that right hand a little bit more. Like now I'm not just feeling a two-handed pattern. I'm able to identify each hand's responsibility a little bit better, all right? Let's go back to playing 8 paradiddles in a row. 1, 2, 8 paradiddles. That's only 4, I'm sorry. Now that's it. 2, ready, go. Two, again, go. Last time. Okay, yeah, so again, even as I did that, as many paradiddles as I've played in my career, every time I played that, I was able to get them a little bit better and hone in on the specifics just a little bit more. I'm gonna kind of keep this short because we're actually we got started a little bit late tonight, so we're abbreviating some of what we're doing here, and I want to make sure we have a little bit of time for maybe to get some questions and answers. And there's also, you know, we got one more pillar to review here. So Dean, I'll hand it back over to you here, unless again you have anything you want to add on what we just did there.
No, that's totally fine with me. So far we've talked through the first 3 pillars. The first one being goal, that's pre-planning, that's happening definitely before you're doing your practicing. We went into the second pillar, which is your environment, which takes place going into and currently during your practice session. Methods is our third pillar. That's going to be how we practice, so that takes place in our practice. But now we're going to talk about our fourth pillar, and so this pillar is called review. Once you've completed your practice session, you know, it's really important for you to take stock of what you did. Like, what did I work on? How did I work on that? What progress did I make because of that work? So we mentioned earlier when we were talking about the environment pillar, we talked about using either a mirror, which is going to give you kind of an instantaneous feedback. It shows you exactly what you look like in the moment. We also talked about using a video camera. I would like to kind of tag on like an audio recorder, whether that's on your phone or like a Zoom audio recorder. Some people have those, but basically a way of recording and actually crystallizing a moment in time, a moment of your practicing in time. So it's really kind of easy for you to reference what you did when you can take time to actually put your mind on the analysis aspect of it. When you're practicing, you are focusing specifically on, using proper technique, playing correct rhythms, making sure that you are, getting the right kind of articulation, maybe the right type of sound quality if you're at a board or a drum. So there's a lot of focuses that you're working on in the moment when you practice, which is why it's a little bit better for reviewing to use a video camera or use an audio recorder where you can sit and take some time and put a little distance between yourself and your practicing, and just kind of analyze and take stock of what you did and what you can do better. So, reviewing your recordings can really open your eyes to a lot of the things that maybe you aren't doing as well as you thought you were, or maybe some things that you learned a little bit incorrectly, which is a little bit humbling and a little bit tough to deal with at first. Which again, we would remind you to kind of check your ego at the door, just to make sure that you're not letting your emotions get in the way of you actually getting better and progressing in your musicianship. Even though that's tough, we think there are pretty much 3 big areas that reviewing your practice and reviewing what you did are going to bring out in yourself. So the first big area is going to be objectivity and awareness. So because you are not, playing in the moment, and I would also recommend when you're reviewing to maybe give yourself a day or two to, sit and not listen to those recordings, maybe come back to those and review that before you start practicing. That might actually be a nice little continuation so that this circle continues to flow. But, when you're sitting and watching, it's good to have some distance, some time between when you practice and when you're reviewing so that you're not, super tied up in the emotional aspect of this. Okay, well, I thought I was playing this well, and this doesn't sound as good as I thought it was going to. It doesn't look as good as I thought it was going to. And so then you get discouraged about your playing and your practicing. Instead, when you give yourself a little bit more time in between review and practice, it gives you a chance to, see things for what they are a little bit more, see things like a teacher would see it, which is an invaluable skill that I think all of us can learn as we're beginning to progress ourselves along our own, musical and percussive journeys. If you can learn how to look at your own playing and review it like a teacher would, and you can learn how to actually change things in your playing to get a more desirable result, if you can learn how to do that process, if you can build that type of awareness, it really is kind of a freeing moment. You don't necessarily need someone in front of you to make you better at that moment, and that's so powerful, and that's very it's a very just uplifting emotion to feel when you can start relying on yourself a little bit more for your own progression. That doesn't mean to say that you can cut your teachers out and not listen to your teachers at all, or to not listen to feedback at all, because again, it's great to approach practicing in music and in general with humility and with the respect for your common person. So don't tune everybody out, but know that you can build your own self up because you're aware of your habits. You're aware of the things that are not getting better. You've got a systematic plan. You're setting your goals. You're setting up your environment in a better way, and you're using a method or methods that are getting you more desirable results. Cool. So this objectivity, this kind of teacher stance that you can develop by watching and reviewing your videos is super invaluable. We can also use reviewing, videos or audio as a way of developing our performance. So a lot of times there can be anxiety that goes into playing a performance or playing a piece of music, whether that's a solo piece of literature, you by yourself, or if you're in the ensemble setting, like, at Carolina Crown, a different marching band, a different drum corps, indoor group. There can be anxiety that goes into putting yourself out there and putting such a vulnerable part of yourself out there, the expression of music. To counteract that, I think it's good to start kind of taking stock of what you look like when you play. to start thinking about what the audience sees and how you're engaging with them, whether that's, super intentional and you're thinking about how you want to do maybe, little gestures, whether that's to express musicality better or to express, visual design if you're in the marching arts a little bit better. But it gives you a little bit more of an opportunity to see what you look like. It also gives you an opportunity to hear what your performance is going to sound like. You can start to think about, okay, what type of emotion will this elicit out of someone? If I diminuendo this phrase a little bit more, will that give them the kind of the sweetness that I'm looking for at the end of that phrase, the more delicate, innocent side of my musical spectrum. So by watching these videos, you can not only develop like what you look like when you perform and the presence that you bring behind your marimba or your snare, your tenors, any of these percussion instruments. You can develop that, but you can also develop just your sound and what you're getting out of that and what the audience is getting out of that. Cool. So that's the second big area. The last one would be just measuring progress. So when we watch videos, it is usually after we have just gotten done playing something, so we can like make a quick, decision and a quick change in the middle of our practice. Okay, well, this is not going well. Let me try this breakdown. Okay, let me take a video of that. Okay, let me watch that back. It's very reactive, but I think sometimes it's important to hold on to your videos. Hold on, if your specific long-term goal in the month of May was to learn through the battery primers in the battery packet, for instance, maybe you could take stock of certain exercises, your duple or triplet timing. You could take videos of that starting at the beginning of May, and then like every 3 or 4 days, whatever your practice schedule is, you take a video and you start watching these videos periodically over time. Maybe you watch back to one that's a month ago, and you're going to see an insane amount of growth. Typically, if you're employing all of these different pillars and you're using them properly and you're actually being intentional and honest with how you're approaching your practicing, you should start seeing growth. And if not, then that's a good time for you to review how you could potentially, make your different pillars a little bit stronger. Maybe there are some cracks in the foundation of your environment. Maybe you've been looking at Facebook a little too much when you're intending to practice. So there's definitely ways that you can try to improve if you're not seeing that instantly. But really, it's just, taking stock and watching your growth over time is super, super fulfilling. Your teachers get to see that, your parents get to see that, but you in the driver's seat don't always get to see that. So using these videos, using these audio recordings is going to be a great way of you measuring your progress and just seeing, where you've come from, where you're at, and where you're continuing to go. Cool. So that's the big points for the review pillar. That gets us through our 4 pillars. So let's see. I guess, Sean, do you have any kind of wrap up thoughts on the review pillar or on just the 4 pillars of practicing in general before we get into questions?
No, again, for all of you guys out there, I would just reference the document for a more in-depth understanding of what we talked about tonight. Dean, I thought you did a great job explaining everything. So I think for the questions, I'd be interested if anybody, maybe not just about, some of the 4 pillars, but if you have a specific question like, hey, how do you practice flam drags? How do you practice this scales? Is something like that. We could definitely briefly get into some specifics on certain, patterns or rudiments if need be. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you guys have any questions right now is a great time to post them. I know that there were a couple posted earlier, so I'm going to scroll back. My friend Nathan Samuel had a question, so let me scroll and find it. All right.
It was about when you were talking about, get the equipment to get the equipment most similar to your performance situation in front of you. If you don't have access to a physical drum, and you probably won't for a while, what would be the next best thing?
That's a great question. So, Sean, do you want to answer the drum side of it, and I can answer the front ensemble side of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's a hard question. There are drum pads out there that I think are starting to feel more like a drum, but it's difficult. It's very like nothing's gonna feel like an actual snare drum head. But for me, I prefer drum pads that have less rebound than the surface that I'm going to be performing on. Like this real feel pad, this is 23, 24 years old. It's literally my favorite thing. If my house were to burn down, this is the one item I would run back in to save, because my identity is ingrained in the rubber here. It's got less rebound than an actual drum, so I feel it for me, it's a little easier to transfer what it feels like here to a drum. But there's a difference. Like, I know when I go from this pad to a drum, there's a difference, and there's no great answer to that, unfortunately. I think it's because I know one of the questions I get a lot is like, some people can get equipment, but they can't drum in their house, because like, I remember when I was in high school, my neighborhood would complain about me drumming inside my bedroom, so I had to go to school and drum there, and I had to get super creative about what to do. But I don't know, that's probably not going to be, that's not an end all be all answer to that question, unfortunately. But that's kind of what I would recommend, a pad with less rebound to work a little more chops, and that's what would work for my hands, though. I would just be consistent on your practice surface and try to navigate the difference between performance surface and practice surface in a consistent way, if possible. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Dean.
Yeah, so on the front ensemble side, I know it's mostly a drum question, but I think this is super applicable to front ensemble right now, especially because a lot of schools and a lot of public spaces where we would normally go and practice and access our instruments are closed off. And so that makes things a lot more difficult. However, if you have 4 mallets, I think that you can get a lot of practice in, and I think that you can get just as much work done outside of, note accuracy and maybe some environmental control and demand. What I've done a couple like live stream things since COVID-19 has kind of taken over the world, about using a pillow on a table or using your mallets on the floor. Basically, you want to replicate everything except for the actual pitch and tonality of your instrument, and you can do that really anywhere that is a flat surface. You don't want to be playing on something that's like rocky, uneven, stuff like that. That doesn't really replicate the keyboard or a drum very well. So really, I think it comes down to being a little, using a little ingenuity, being determined to get your practice in no matter what, not giving up when things get tough. And I think it uses, you can use something like a piece of paper and draw out like individual keys if you want to get really crazy about it. Like, it really, like, you can go 9 yards, you can go 1 yard in. It really depends on how dedicated you are to it, but it's possible for sure. There were a couple questions I know about the packet, which is awesome. Thank you guys for being interested in our exercise packet and just kind of learning more about how we do our approach. Right now, I believe the packet is available. If you go online to Crown's website, there should be some links that lead you to like registrations and stuff like that for auditions. I believe those are still up, and I believe that would still get you access to the packet. You would need to pay for that. However, we are doing this off-season training program right now, and in the off-season training program, if you want to submit some videos of your playing, especially if you've got like world-class experience, if you're feeling confident that you're ready to play with the big dogs a little bit more, send us a video, and I think as soon as you're approved for that, you would send that to either myself or Frankie. As soon as you're approved for that, I believe Nancy, who's like our logistical guru, would send you a link to a free packet. So, I mean, if you're really dedicated and working with us and like learning from us and have enjoyed this session or past sessions, I would encourage you to reach out to myself or Frankie. And I'm sure our emails are somewhere on the Crown social mediums, both on Instagram and Facebook. So look it up and you'll find us. Let's see, Sean, do you see any? There's a lot of cool questions right now, which is dope. Do you see any that pop out to you?
Unfortunately, Dean, because of my setup with the phone, it's really hard for me to scroll.
It's hard for you to scroll. Cool. Let me pick 1 or 2 more. Let's see. Okay, I like this one. How do you become a cleaner player? I think that's a good question. I think we could both talk about that for a second. Do you want to tackle that first, or would you like me to?
Yeah, I don't mind starting.
Okay.
The metronome. Seriously, what I talked about ear training earlier, that when the skill I learned from learning learning how to bury the Met is the same skill it takes for me to listen to the snare drummer right next to me and blend my sound with him. It really is. It's the metronome is not just there to dial in your accuracy and your rhythmic clarity. Obviously that's one of the main reasons, but the ear training is key that you get from that, and that's what I was talking about. Like you will the metronome, learning to point your ear at that and aim really small with what you're listening to, and learn how to bury it. That's how you learn to play in the line. From my opinion, they're a very similar skill set. I guess for me, that translated. I remember when I was learning to play clean, that was definitely the connection point to me. It's like, oh, like I'm in rehearsal with other people, and there's something from my practice routine that I can draw upon that supports this environment. I'm listening to something to try to not just play with it, but try to bury it, try to lock in with it, and be perfect with it. I recommend there are ear training. If for any of you college students take an ear training class, that a lot of those have to do with hearing pitch and whatnot. But I also think being a good listener is just a skill set, and any way you can exercise good listening is going to promote your ability to play clean. Practice with other people. We talked about community in the second pillar as a part of environment. I think that it's good to practice with other people. During the summer, some of the stuff in this document was developed over a few summers I spent with Crown, where we would just kind of all get in a big mob and practice together. We weren't even though we were together, we almost weren't rehearsing, because we were doing some of these patterns just one count at a time, like really changing things, not afraid to make mistakes for the sake of getting better, and we were just practicing together, and that made us, that was a really big part of our identity this year. So that's another way to learn to play clean. Dean?
Yeah, so I would say playing clean, you kind of nailed it on the head when you said burying the metronome. I think that's the essential skill you have to first figure out how to do. Can I bury the metronome? Can I play perfectly in time without hearing that blip in between when I'm playing? And a lot of you are going to be like, wait a second. You want to hear the metronome, right? You want to play to the metronome. Of course, definitely. But the goal is to not hear that when you're not supposed to. You're supposed to bury that on the downbeats. If you can hear that and you start figuring out how to do that more consistently, then it's just applying that to a different person's sound. If you're in like an ensemble setting, let's say you're, the fifth marimba, so you're on the outside of the marimba line. That's a hard position to be on. If you're in a group that has front vibes that are outside of that, that's even harder to be in sometimes. But the best way of doing that is to figure out how to play clean with the person beside you, to bury their sound, their specific kind of articulation, and then just kind of move from there. So I think you kind of nailed it on the head with that, just burying the sound idea. Let's see. You guys have some good questions, so I really appreciate that. Let me find maybe two more. So Sean, someone asked, what type of exercise materials do you consider the most essential to work on? Our friend Preston Jones particularly asked that.
So believe it or not, legatos and accent tap. Okay, to me, like I'll talk about the technique real quick. You can use arm to move the mallet or the stick. You can use finger, and the most important one is you can use wrist. To me, the wrist is the part of the technique that should always happen. When I'm using arm, I'm also using wrist. When I'm using finger, I'm also using wrist. There's some exotic techniques at the extremity of skill sets that you'll have to kind of explore. But to me, fast legatos. Like one of my goals, when my hands are at their best, I can play eighth notes one-handed at 200 beats a minute nonstop. That's like a good meter for me to know, because in my age, like my hands, during the summer they get strong, then during the fall they get weak practice, and like I go in ups and downs. And when I'm able to play eighth notes at 200 beats a minute on my left hand, it's because my hands are warm. They've been exercising daily. They've been in a routine, and that makes my legatos make my rolls better. My legatos make my flam drags better. My legatos make my everything better. Okay. But rolls don't necessarily make my legatos better. They can. Chops help chops, but so for me, the foundation, and as I get better with, as your practicing improves, the longer your list of material is. Like, when you first start, you've only got a few exercises you're practicing because that's all you can handle. That's all you know. The more experienced you get, it's not like you have to stop working on those fundamentals. You have to constantly do maintenance on the fundamentals, and you'll notice the more professional musicians, they're the ones that are practicing the most out there, not the least. The professional musicians, because they have the fundamentals they've got to maintain, they got to do the maintenance on, and then they've got all of those crazy exotic material that's just over the top. And it's all in your practice sessions, you'll discover that it's all based on those foundational techniques. So things like legatos and accent tap, that to me, those are the most fundamental exercises to play. But there's always, it depends in there. There's always, there's difference of opinion with that, I would say, and all within good reason, for sure. So, but that's definitely my strongest.
Okay, so there's another question about talking about the percussion off-season training program. Is it just for people with world-class experience, or can others apply too? You can absolutely apply if you don't have world-class experience. It is more likely, since you've been in that setting in the past with world-class members and people that have been in those groups, it's a little more likely that you will be able to meet the demands and the rigor that we're going to try to hit all of this exercise and fundamental learning stuff over the summer. But that does not in any way mean that you cannot apply. Like, that application is free. It's really just sending in a video of your playing, introducing yourself, and then going from there. These clinic sessions are free. We're going to post the links to those, I think, the Monday preceding all of the clinics. And, obviously you guys are here for this one, so you figured out how to do that once. So we'll continue to do those and try to make as much of our educational aspects of this off-season training program available to you guys. Like, we're going to try to post the PDF that you guys have access to with the video so that more people can kind of use it as a practice regimen and routine, hopefully. Let's see. I know Tom had a great question. So Tom Hannum asked, does feel come into play, and how do you factor this into playing clean? I'm gonna jump into this one really quick, if that's okay. I talk about the different sensations. Like, we use three main sensations when we're playing music and practicing. We use our eyes or our sight, we use our hearing or our ears or our hearing, and we use our tactile sense of feel. We use like what responses we're getting from the board. We send energy into the board, we get that response back, vibrations back from the board or the drum or whatever we're playing. So naturally you're going to want to feel some things, like some exercises like broccoli, for instance. When we get to the ones and we sing into that one mallet, boom, 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 boom. It's very groovy. It feels good to listen to, right? If you focus too much on the feel, you can start to get away from actually playing with the metronome and playing in time. That does not mean that you should not understand and identify that groove and understand how to apply that groove and feel to the metronome, if that makes sense. So they really do have to work hand in hand. You can't rely too much on one or the other. You can't play everything super stiff and robotic. You got to be a little organic and let things breathe, but you can't feel to the point where you're actually getting away from good habits, technique and rhythmic accuracy wise, especially. What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think, to me, feel that's when I've mastered something. Like, because I know I'm still hitting beat to beat metronomic perfection, but then that makes me recognize like the feel of the music, which is ultimately maybe the end goal, is for us to not have to, you know, be so mathematical, you know, precision, but to be able to know that that's happening, but we're actually in tune with the feel of the overall phrase that helps us navigate that phrase in a way more musical quality. And to me, and I love that question from Tom, because I really think that that just shows you the depth of the topic we're talking about tonight. You know, how deep you have to go into this. And you know, I think feel deserves its own segment in the document almost, you know, and it really does. And yeah, to me, that's the best way I can like. Feel's my favorite thing, and you know, because it's this musical groove, it's this musical connection, and if you feel as the performer, let me put it this way, as the performer, if you don't feel connected to the groove, the audience probably won't either. You know, so I think it's crucial that you identify that connection and recognize the groove, the pattern, the feel, you know, and that experience, you know, and I think that's how others will experience the same thing. So.
We have a question from Wade Taylor. Any specific things you want in the off-season audition? So the beautiful thing about how we posted about these off-season audition videos is that we did not say, hey, here's the video audition. You need to hit this and this and this and this from our packet. We left it pretty open because we know that everybody comes from different backgrounds, different types of exercises, and we really want to see you at your best. So I would say sending some fundamental exercises, you know, for the front ensemble, that would be something that references the four mallet stroke types: double vertical, single independent, single alternating, and double laterals. Something that references those. Some scalar activity would be nice to see, just so how you move around the board. 2 and 4 mallets if possible, but at least one. A piece of solo literature so that we can see how you express music. A lot of this is, you know, a very big aggressive activity that we're doing, and so you want to play forte all the time typically. However, we like to approach things with a little more musicality at our heart and really bring that into the fold as well. So we'd like to see you play something a little bit more soloistic as well. We're not necessarily trimming people out of the fold based on any kind of technical specifics. You know, like if you play a different technique than I do, I'm not going to necessarily judge you for that right now. It's really about fostering a community of like-minded and similar abilities, you know, to just try to like foster our percussion community a little bit more. I hope that makes sense. Anything on the battery side in particular, Sean?
You know, unfortunately, I think that's a little bit more of a Frankie question.
Great, yeah.
In terms of the specifics, but I think, you know, like for me, I would get broad with just saying range. This is like, you know, we're and you said it well, not just all high and low, you know, or not just fast, you know, but slow and controlled and precise, you know. And I know that might not give you an answer in terms of what exactly we're looking for in terms of exercises and that, but that'll I definitely you know, if you don't have the packet yet, everybody should get the ground packet. I think I want to say there's almost 15 exercises in the battery packet this year. Some of them are what we call the primers, which are great for the third pillar when you're in the third pillar of practice. And some of them are the etudes, which is, you know, when you're in the macro process of that third pillar. But they're all, it's great material. A lot of time and effort is put into the battery packet. A lot of conversations about what's effective, what's not, what's worked for us in the past, what's working, what's not working with us, and you know, we got to tweak. You know, I mean, so I would definitely go that route.
Okay, so I am posting information to both mine and Frankie's emails in this chat. So if you have questions, you can hit me up. My email is in the chat. I also put Frankie's in there. I hope he's not mad at me for that. I'm sure he won't be. Let's see. There was.
I don't mind if you put mine in there too.
Cool. Yeah. I got you. I'll put yours in there as well. There was one more question. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so you guys know, Frankie is in charge of the battery at Carolina Brown, but I'm definitely involved in there too. And I'm definitely there to ask or if you've got any questions or any advice whatsoever, especially as it pertains to tonight's clinic. I love talking about this stuff. So
Nice. I'll go ahead and post yours in there really quick, Sean. There was one more question that I wanted to get to before we parted ways with everybody. Let's see. It was my friend David. Where is he at? Okay, David Menguite. I probably said that last name very incorrectly. I'm sorry, David. David asked, how do you train your ears and habits to avoid complacency? Training your eyes to bury the met, but also discipline to avoid thinking that's close enough. Also in terms of tonality and recognizing cleanliness. So you've asked a lot of great questions in one short period of time. I would say you develop your ears and habits reactively, like if you find yourself thinking, okay, I'm getting bored with this. Okay, like I don't really need to focus on this as much as I used to. That's a great time to bust out some of the tips that we mentioned in the environment section. I think playing along to music a lot of times, like an actual piece of music that you personally gel with, I think that makes everything a little bit more fun. It gives you a new lease on understanding how rhythms apply to your favorite piece of music, but also how you can hear and feel different grooves. We were talking about the feel earlier, how you can hear and feel different grooves to different types of music and different tempos and stuff like that. Sean, what do you think?
So the question's about how to avoid complacency.
Yes.
Yeah, so I would say for me, I just I have a lot of material that I read, in terms of practice material. I showed you my books from earlier. I really try to search out, I go to like the Percussive Arts Society. Their website has a lot of resources. So there's, it's like we're in the marching arts of percussion. But if you've ever been to PASIC out in Indianapolis every November, you'll actually realize that marching percussion is a small fraction of percussion as a whole. In fact, I mean, it's really like a small blip on the radar. And one of my huge developments occurred when I went to PASIC for the first time. I think it was in Austin, Texas, years ago. And I went to PASIC and I realized, like, oh man, I've got it. There's like this whole other side of percussion and music that I really need to
so nice.
And I think that really became valuable for me. I also think that, concentration takes practice. Awareness takes practice. And you've got to, a lot of the things you said in there, don't think of, like, they're skill sets, and they require practice and awareness, like reactive awareness, like Dean was saying. I think that's really important. And I think in our packet, there's a few links to some like outside material about concentration, about rest, about motivation, some things like that. That is huge. Like, one of my favorite things to do, one of the things I've been starting my days off with in this whole crisis we're in, is I wake up in the morning and I watch a video about some extreme rock climber or adventurer or mountaineer that just does something crazy, and it's so motivational to me. And then the mornings I'm able to do that, I'm like walking around the rest of the day, like cleaning my garage, okay, redoing the office, okay, we're gonna practice for 4 hours until my callus starts to bleed again. Yes, and like those days are great. So that outside will this packet, Dean said in the beginning, this packet isn't just about practice. I mean, there's some life skills in this, and studying, figuring out how what you're doing applies to your life. That'll reduce the complacency. That'll create more variety. That'll, reinvigorate your motivation when you see the bigger picture that you're creating for yourself. So,
Practicing mindfulness and meditation, I would encourage you to do both of those things, because mindfulness naturally encourages you to take stock of a thought when it comes in and let it go, and focus on what you're doing and focus on being in your body and in the moment in particular. So I would encourage you, mindfulness, meditation, yoga. Those are three of my favorite things currently. So maybe it's just because I'm biased, but those things will actually help you start to control your thoughts a little bit more, hopefully. Cool. I mean, it's 10 guys, so I think we should probably wrap it up a little bit. You guys have asked some great questions. I've included mine and Frankie's and Sean's emails in this, so if you guys have any specific questions, we want this to be a dialogue. And again, we want to engage with you guys as much as we can. Send us a message, reach out to us, apply for this off-season training program if possible. And keep tuning into these clinics because they're a lot of fun. I feel like every time I prepare for one, I learn more about kind of what I've been teaching, and I learn a little bit more about the percussion activity. So, keep tuned in and let us know how we can help you. Sean, any final notes?
No, just thank you to everybody. Stay safe out there. Make good decisions. Take advantage of this time to practice right now, I would say. I think, that's maybe a small silver lining we can find in everything going on right now. So, but I wish you guys well, and yeah, feel free to shoot me an email. Any specific questions, I will definitely get back to you. Give me some time, be patient, but I promise I'll get back to you. So.
Cool. Well, thank you guys, everybody. It's been a lot of fun talking about practicing, and I hope to talk to you guys a little bit more in the future. If you're looking for some extra homework, our timpani player from last year, Steven, has posted his timpani video, and he has not stopped talking about it in this chat. So at some point, you should watch this timpani video because it's pretty good. Honestly, I've seen a little bit of it. It's pretty good. Cool. Well, thank you guys so much. It's been a lot of fun. Until next time, I hope you guys stay safe and keep drumming. Keep the faith.
Yeah.